The morning of my graduation was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. After 4 years of studying, working late nights, and pushing through moments when I felt like giving up, I had finally made it. I stood in front of the small mirror in my apartment, adjusting my graduation robe. The blue fabric felt heavier than it should have, almost like it carried the weight of every sacrifice I had made to get here. I had imagined this day many times growing up. I pictured my parents sitting proudly in the audience, my mom smiling with tears in her eyes while my dad clapped loudly when my name was called. I imagined taking pictures together, laughing, and maybe even going out for dinner to celebrate. But deep down, a quiet voice inside me knew things rarely went that way in my family. Growing up, I had always been the responsible child. My parents said that often, but it never felt like a compliment. It felt more like an excuse they used whenever they forgot about me. My younger sister Lily was the center of everything. She was outgoing, beautiful, and always surrounded by attention. Whenever something happened in her life, it became a huge family event. Her birthdays were filled with decorations, music, and dozens of guests. My parents always made sure she felt special. My celebrations were different: simple dinners, small cakes from the grocery store, sometimes just a quick, happy birthday, before everyone went back to talking about Lily. Still, I convinced myself it didn't bother me. Graduation, though, felt different. It was the first time I truly wanted my parents to show up for me. A few weeks before the ceremony, I called them. "Mom, Dad, my graduation is on June 12th. It would mean a lot if you came." There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Then my mother sighed softly. "Oh, honey, that's the same day as Lily's engagement party." I froze. Engagement party? I asked quietly. No one told me she was engaged. My father laughed lightly. It happened pretty quickly. You know how exciting these things are. I swallowed hard. But what about my graduation? Another silence filled the line. Finally, my mother spoke again. "You're the strong one, Daniel. You've always been independent. You'll understand." When the call ended, I sat there staring at my phone. Graduation day arrived faster than I expected. The campus was alive with celebration. Families crowded around the ceremony hall, holding flowers, balloons, and cameras. Everywhere I looked, parents were hugging their children and taking pictures. I walked through the crowd alone. When my name was finally called, I stepped onto the stage and accepted my diploma. The applause was polite, but there were no cheers, no voices calling my name. Just silence. Later that evening, curiosity made me open social media. My screen filled with pictures of Lily's engagement party. Decorations, champagne, laughter. My parents stood beside her with proud smiles. Under the photos, my mother had written one simple caption: "Our princess deserves the best celebration in the world." I stared at the words for a long time before quietly closing my phone. That night, I realized something painful. In my own family's story, I wasn't the main character. I was just the background. The first year after graduation was harder than I had imagined. Not because I struggled to find a job or to pay the bills, but because I had to accept the truth that my parents didn't care enough to celebrate my achievements. I moved across the country to a small city, far from the constant reminders of Lily's life of attention and privilege. I rented a tiny apartment and took a low-paying job at a tech company, barely enough to get by. At first, I called my parents occasionally, hoping they would show some interest, even a small gesture of pride. But every call went unanswered, or they brushed me off with vague excuses about being too busy. Over time, I stopped reaching out. I realized they weren't ignoring me because of timing or coincidence. They simply didn't see me as someone worth celebrating. Meanwhile, I couldn't escape the glimpses of their lives online. Social media was full of Lily's adventures, lavish vacations, parties, and family gatherings. My parents' profiles were always smiling beside her, their captions overflowing with pride and love for the daughter who had never once waited for approval or validation. It stung, but I refused to let it break me. Instead, I buried myself in work. I stayed late at the office, volunteered for the toughest projects, and learned every aspect of the business that others avoided. Slowly, the years transformed me. My small, overlooked position became a senior role, then a leadership role. My apartment grew into a modest loft. By the third year, I was no longer just surviving. I was quietly building a life I could be proud of. I learned the value of independence the hard way. No one would celebrate me or hold my hand through challenges, so I became my own support. Every promotion, every milestone was earned through sweat and determination, and I loved that about myself. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was capable. I already knew. 7 years passed in silence. Lily's social media was still filled with celebrations, but now it felt like watching a distant life rather than a family I belonged to. My parents continued their rituals of attention toward her, oblivious to the person I had become. Then one evening, everything changed. My phone rang. The number was familiar but unexpected. It was my mother. I hesitated, staring at the screen. 7 years without a call. Daniel, her voice trembled, small and fragile. We need your help. I didn't respond immediately. For years, I had imagined this moment, fantasizing about anger, confrontation, maybe even revenge. But now that it had come, I felt something else entirely, calm. Help, I finally asked, my voice steady. After all these years, there was a pause, filled with a strange desperation. I realized in that moment that the world had shifted. The people who had ignored me now had nowhere else to turn, and for the first time in 7 years, I held the power. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to help. When my mother's voice came through the phone, it was nothing like I remembered. It wasn't the confident, self-assured voice of the woman who had once brushed me aside. It trembled, small and fragile, carrying a weight of desperation I had never heard before. "Daniel, please, don't hang up," she said. I held the phone in my hand, staring out at the city lights through my office window. 7 years of silence. 7 years of birthdays ignored, achievements unnoticed, and milestones celebrated without me. For a long moment, I didn't say a word. "What do you need?" I asked finally, my voice calm, measured. There was a long pause, and then quietly my mother spoke. "It's about Lily." I had expected it. Of course it was about Lily. The sister who had been the center of their lives. The one who had everything I had ever wanted: attention, love, recognition. She lost everything. My mother said, her voice cracked. Her husband, the investments, it all went wrong. They're in debt, the house gone. They don't know what to do. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I could feel the weight of their helplessness through the phone. It was a strange feeling to be on the other side of this power dynamic. For years, I had been the one invisible, the one needing attention, validation, help. And now it was them. My father's voice finally broke the silence. We heard about your success, Daniel. We thought maybe you could help your sister." I almost laughed, but I swallowed it. He hadn't spoken my name in 7 years, and now suddenly he knew enough to call me for help. "We're family." And my mother added, her voice trembling, "We need you, Daniel." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the skyline, the city lights flickering like distant stars. 7 years ago, I had walked across a stage hoping to see my family in the crowd. Today, they were asking for something far bigger. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the years settle on my shoulders. I could feel the anger, the hurt, the countless small betrayals of my past. And yet when I spoke, my voice was quiet, steady, funny. I said, "I remember being family too." There was silence on the line, heavy and uncomfortable. I didn't rush to fill it. I wanted them to feel it, to understand that for 7 long years they had made a choice. And now, for the first time, the consequences of that choice were theirs. Her next words were barely a whisper. "Please, we have nowhere else to turn." I let the phone rest in my hand and looked out the window again. I had spent years learning how to live without them. Now they were learning how it felt to need someone who had long learned to survive alone. And I realized quietly that I had all the time in the world to decide what kind of help I would give, or if I would give any at all. A week later, they arrived at my office. My parents looked smaller than I remembered, their pride stripped away by time and circumstance. Lily was with them, the same sister who had once commanded every room she entered. now hunched slightly, her once confident eyes dull and ashamed. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence was thick, almost tangible, filling the space between us like a heavy curtain. I watched as my mother's eyes swept across the office, lingering on the sleek furniture, the floor, the ceiling windows, the city spread out below us. Her lips trembled. "You've done so well, Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely above the hum of the air conditioning. I nodded politely. Those words had been my dream once, the validation I had longed for. But now they carried no warmth, no love. Only recognition of success and a hint of desperation. My father cleared his throat. We know we weren't perfect parents," he began, carefully, almost pleadingly. I raised a hand gently. "You didn't come here to apologize," I said. They looked down and I saw it. The realization that they had no right to be here except out of need. They had ignored me for years. Their pride and affection had been reserved entirely for Lily, and now she was the one begging. Lily finally spoke, her voice small. "Daniel, please, we need help getting back on our feet." I studied her face, noting the way her eyes darted nervously, the tremor in her hands. This was the sister who had been the center of attention for my entire life. She had everything I didn't, and now she had nothing. I stood slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The boy whose graduation no one attended had quietly built a life that even I sometimes struggled to believe. And in that moment, I understood something important. Revenge didn't have to be about destruction. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge was simply showing people who you had become without them. I turned back to face them. "I will help you," I said calmly. Relief flooded their faces instantly. But I didn't stop there. I offered Lily a job at my company. Entry, level, no special treatment. She would have to earn her way the same way I had. "If you want a better life," I said, "you'll have to build it yourself, the same way I did." Their relief was immediate, but it was tinged with the humility of realizing that they had underestimated me for years. They had ignored the person I had become, only to come back when they needed something. And as they left my office that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete, quiet satisfaction. The boy who had walked across a stage alone, invisible to the world, had finally graduated from needing anyone's approval. The sweetest revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was life, and I was living mine on my own terms.